Boston takes center stage in an immigration battle and criticism over city council hearings. The city council president is here this morning to answer our questions. It's time to go on the record.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to OTR. I'm Ed Harding.
And I'm Erica Tarantel. Charmin is off. Joining us is Boston City Council President Ruth Z. Louis-Jean. Thank you for being here.
Happy to be here. Thank you, Erica.
Great to see you. Great to see you. So let's start with the criticism over canceled or postponed council hearings. We're now up to 3 city councilors who have raised concerns. The Boston Globe editorial board is also saying that if the Wu administration wants the issue aired, it gets discussed, but potentially embarrassing issues are being brushed aside. So what is your response to that?
It's important to know that when we schedule hearings, we do it in collaboration with the administration. And sometimes it's going to take more than one date. You have to offer another date or another date. And sometimes schedules change. Could the administration be doing a better job with us when it comes to scheduling hearings? Yes. But I know that I was working with the mayor on an event and she offered 2 dates and I couldn't make either of those and we had to go to a third date.
Right.
And so when you're trying to have a hearing and you want multiple people there, people who are busy, I'm talking about our police commissioner, I'm talking about the head of some of our departments, we really do have to have some malleability and some flexibility. We've had a number of hearings this summer, more than we had last year. I've been at hearings every week this week during the summer, and it's important to know that while it is summer and people do have summer schedules, we do have to continue the work of the council. Now, I do want to make clear that even those who are criticizing have themselves objected to work when other councilors have presented resolutions. They've objected and prevented us from moving forward. So if you call it out for on others, you have to also make sure you're calling it out for yourself.
Parts too.
There are a lot of moving parts to scheduling hearings. Right. Sometimes someone will file a resolution and someone will object, and that's just the rule of the council. Right. If you object to a resolution, then we don't get to vote on it. But if you actually want to have a discussion about an issue, it should happen at a hearing. And yes, we have to do a better job working with the administration about dates. But if we offer a date and the administration can't do that one date, we do also need to be flexible about, is there a time the next week or the week after where we can everyone, all of the key players in the room. Sometimes I've had hearings and it probably wasn't on the best date for the administration and I wasn't able to get the chief of the department for that hearing at the meeting. But it was important for me to have that hearing as soon as possible. So sometimes there are trade-offs. We all have very busy schedules, but we do need to make sure that we are discussing the issues that matter most to residents of the city of Boston. The residents don't care about, this meeting can't happen then, right, it can't. Right, they care about us solving problems. Right, and I'm a problem solver. I'm a lawyer, a problem solver, president of the council, and I know that residents just care about us solving problems.
We also understand it's summer, it's the end of August. That being said, we're just weeks from the preliminary election, September 9th.
Yes.
So Councillor John Fitzgerald said publicly he was asked to move a hearing until after that date. Are you expecting more hearings once that date passes? A busy September?
For example, there was a hearing that was supposed to happen on Thursday of this past week that the administration couldn't make, and they wanted to happen next week. And it's about a controversial issue. So I'm not really seeing that. The preliminary election is soon. It's September 9th. I have not had that in conversations with the administration about moving things before or after the preliminary, but I also do know that it's a busy season. In just 2 weeks, we have school starting, and so we want to make sure that we're getting things right. I have not had those conversations, and I just had a hearing with the administration, and we have hearings that we're planning coming up, and we have not at all discussed what's happening before the preliminary election or after. And even if something is happening after the preliminary election, we still have a general election. It's you can't obfuscate, you can't hide from the issue. But, if you offer a date that is, for example, a few days before a preliminary election, and there are dates that are offered a week or two after. Now, I'm not in the weeds. I don't know. As the president of the council, I don't always know about what's happening around the scheduling of hearings. I'm not always brought into those conversations. But there needs to be understanding on both sides here for us to be able to get the work of the city done. No one cares about this back and forth fighting. We just want to have the discussions and have the conversations to tackle the issues that residents care about, whether that's trash, whether that's mass and CAS, whether that's making sure that our schools are safe for all of our students. That's what residents care about. Yeah. And we are having those hearings and we are having those discussions. And I'd also just like to say that a lot of the work that happens, yes, it happens in hearings, but it also happens in community. I was on a community walk this past week in Roxbury helping residents think about how are we building streets that increased safety for our older adults, that has more lighting at parks. So a lot of the work also happens outside of City Hall.
Understood. Well, now to an issue that has really captured the country. It's been impacting Boston. Acting ICE Director Todd Lyons says that federal immigration authorities plan to flood Boston. This comes after Mayor Wu refused to strip the sanctuary protections in Boston. Let's listen to both sides.
Sanctuary does not mean safer streets. It means more criminal aliens out and about the neighborhoods. So 100%, you will see a larger ICE presence.
Boston will not back down from who we are and what we stand for. We will not! Stop attacking our cities to hide your administration's failures. Yeah.
So Mayor Wu has been really consistent on this. She is not backing down. Do you think she's taken the right position here?
I do. The Trump administration and the president himself said that their focus would be on criminals and it would be on people who are causing harm. Boston, if you zoom out and you look at us in comparison to a lot of other cities, we are one of the safest cities. And we want the federal government's help when it comes to educating our kids, when it comes to making sure that we are preparing our residents for jobs in the trades, for them to be successful in the 21st century with what's happening with AI. We don't need their help when it comes to making sure that our streets are safe.
But are you worrying that by confronting them in this direct way, they will take some of that support away, federal funds away from what we do need?
I want to be clear on who the antagonists are. We have our heads down, working with our police department, working with community leaders, doing the work of community policing. We just had National Night Out where the police and the administration and elected officials, we go out and we honor members of community who have been doing the work of keeping their community safe. And you know what? Sometimes those people are immigrants. And so for us to be hammering after a group of people who have not shown in the city of Boston to be the cause of our violent crime or of major issues, it's a distraction. It's a distraction from the ways in which we do want to work with the federal government, in which we've been used to working with the federal government when it comes to issues of climate change, when it comes to solving the issue that is so hard for so many, which is making sure that everyone has a place to call home. We have a housing crisis. Come in and help us solve that problem, where we have proven to be able to do the work on policing our streets, on making sure and doing the work to make sure that all of our communities feel safe. And sometimes, when you zoom in and you look at particular neighborhoods and particular areas, we do need to be supporting them more. But when you look at the data and what we should be doing all the time as political leaders and as people who want to create better societies is looking at the data, when you look at the data, we just don't have the problem that the Trump administration is identifying. They're in search of a problem, and we are not giving them one.
So let's talk about some of the issues that are facing Boston specifically. Residents have continued to complain about the problems at Mass and Cass. This is something that has been talked about for years. So what else can be done? What else needs to be done?
It is a difficult problem that's happening at Mass and Cass. It is a result of a national opioid crisis. And so many are suffering. Those who are using are suffering, and the residents of the South End who wake up and have someone on their stoop or who have someone inside of their home. Like, no one wants that. And I don't want that for any of our residents. We have a resource-intensive problem that is not one Boston created. Right, we have a national problem. A lot of pharmaceutical companies, a lot of corporate institutions are responsible, but we have to deal with that issue. But it's not just a Boston problem. It's a regional problem. It's a state problem. We have folks who are in the Mass and Cass area from Rhode Island, from Connecticut. It's a New England problem. And it requires a lot of resources of making sure we have enough beds to treat people who are in desperate need of treatment. A lot of the people who are down in the Mass and Cass area, they don't want to be there either. We have failed people structurally in society, and we need to figure out how we get people into treatment. We need to make sure that we are making sure that everyone who needs it has the resources to succeed. Easier said than done. A lot of our treatment, people need to be in treatment for a longer period of time to really help solve the issue. We need to get people job training. Sue Sullivan down in the Newmarket Bid has a great program of people who are formerly using or who are in detox are themselves helping to clean up the area. We have programs working out of the district attorney's office, services over sentences to give people services rather than jail time, because we know incarceration, throwing everyone in prison and in jail, is not the solution either. It's just very resource intensive.
It is a complicated and complex issue. Next item, we need to talk about Tanya Fernandez Anderson. She did plead guilty in May to federal corruption charges, but did not step down until July 4th. There was a push for ethics reform, and on this show, Councillor Ed Flynn called for a commission. Take a look at this. Take a listen.
We need to change the way we do business. We need an ethics commission or an ethics committee, but we need to demonstrate transparency, accountability, ethics, and honesty. And at times we don't do that.
We need an ethics commission.
I appreciate the former city council president's comments. I will state that it is really important that on a 13-member body, a small 13-member body, that we are able to work together. I am a lawyer who has worked on an ethics investigation as a past attorney, and I do not feel that I should be sitting in judgment of my other colleagues. That's why we have the State Ethics Commission. So what I did was increase the number of trainings that we have from the State Ethics Commission on the Boston City Council. On a small body like ours, we also don't have a lot of support for our employees. So we're building a stronger human resources structure and infrastructure, hiring people to be able to do that work. The work that we need on the City Council is really around that. An ethics commission, where we have that at the state level, is important to make sure that my colleagues, and that employees of the council know that if they have questions, they can turn to the State Ethics Commission that has the jurisdiction, that has the independence that is necessary of any ethics investigation, and they do that work. So making it the environment more comfortable for people to turn to the State Ethics Commission is the right way, rather than an ethics committee that can be so easily politicized, especially in an election year.
Okay, well, Fernandez Anderson, she invited her supporters to be in the room for her final hearing. This was criticized by other councilors. Did you find that to be appropriate?
City Council and City Hall is open to the public. So anyone can come and attend a City Council meeting. And so I will never state that an individual cannot come into chambers. It's really important that even in these moments that we continue to let people know that City Hall is open to everyone, and that there are at-large councilors who are there to support residents and all of the issues that they have, which is why I talked about this past week. I was in Roxbury doing a neighborhood walk with residents, making sure that they know that they continue to have elected officials who are showing up for them and who support them. So I think that's what I've been focused on. I know that people want to turn their attention to what seems the more salacious issues, but at the end of the day, I'm always a problem solver. And as an elected official, I want us to be laser focused on the issues that people don't find as attractive or interesting to talk about, issues of trash, issues of rodents, of how we get more lights in our parks, of how we make sure that everyone has a home. That's what we need to focus on.
We continue on the record. Stay with us.